In the last 18 months, we've seen 5 major pulp and paper mills go down, and 2 biomass facilities have shut down. In all total, that represents 4 million tons of harvesting capability in the state of Maine that's not going to be utilized.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. There's an economic hurricane hitting the Maine woods. I think we better spend another day in the forest to see what's going on. Later on today's show, we'll get into the sudden problems facing our economy. Dana Doran is Executive Director of the Professional Logging Contractors of Maine, and he'll be joining us later. First, though, we have some unfinished business. Last week, I spent a day in the woods with a forester learning how to see the forest the way a professional sees it. Normally, when I look at the forest, I'm looking for wildlife. I pay attention to the habitat. A forester looks at the trees, judging age, diversity, growing conditions, disease. We may look at the same set of trees, but each of us sees something completely different. Today, we're going to put that into practice. Just west of Lincoln, the state of Maine owns 1,500 acres in a place called Carpenter Ridge. It is now the site of active forest management. So, let's go read the forest. I'm going to see if I learned anything last week. We're headed there now. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. First, let's get up to speed. David Irving operates Shelterwood Solutions, a consultancy that designs and manages forestry plans. I'm in Dave's truck right now as we head to Carpenter Ridge. We actually started up in the county during last week's show, so I could learn how to read the woods like a forester. We visited an 800-acre site in Oakfield, owned by somebody who was interested in more than just harvestable trees.
He's an avid hunter and outdoorsman, and his objective is to manage equally for habitat, particularly grouse and woodcock habitat, but also for forest health. And forest health also means quality of the timber resource. It's not always cleaning out the sickest, but it's also promoting better trees that might grow into saw logs or that are saw logs and to grow them larger.
So as we got started, I observed the trees I thought I was seeing. Beech, birch, spruce, fir, lots of sugar maple, some red maple. And I think I'm doing pretty good at recognizing tree diversity, only to learn there is another, bigger scale of diversity to watch for.
We call it landscape diversity because we're looking at this mixed wood stand in front of us, but then behind us we have a conifer-dominated stand that's mostly balsam fir. You can tell by the pointier tops.
Yeah. So, for instance, those really pointy ones are balsam fir. That one's more rounded.
And that's a red spruce.
That's a red spruce, yeah.
That's right. But then, as we're looking across this clearing here, there's a 100% hardwoods, and not just hardwoods, northern hardwoods, dominated by sugar maple with a yellow birch, beech, and white ash component.
Meanwhile, there's a feller buncher in the woods making some improvements to about 15 acres of woodland.
What he's doing is performing a light thinning operation. We're thinning this mixed wood stand. Actually, he may be into a northern hardwood stand at this point, and he's taking out approximately 40% of the standing basal area, removing some of the unhealthy trees.
Now, how does the operator decide which trees to keep and which to cut? I asked.
Well, these ones over here, that's a good future maple log. It's not diseased too bad, whatever. The beech, of course, that's got to go. That's all diseased.
We also looked at an entirely different operation, clearing several acres right to the ground.
What we've performed here is a patch clear cut to promote grouse and woodcock habitat. Actually, I say that it's really we're promoting early successional habitat with a focus on grouse and woodcock, but many other species will utilize this cut as well, such as moose for browsing, deer for browsing.
This is going to produce some berries at some point.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. So multiple species will utilize this.
And at another site, the forest management plan dealt with a woodlot that had seen most of the high-value wood removed in previous years, and the lot was better for wildlife management than future timber harvest.
Well, we're trying here. Again, we've taken a large property that was high graded. The history of the property was a lot of high grading, a lot of market cutting. Left us with a pole size very undiverse forest, and we've created these little patch cuts, these openings that provide habitat to birds, mammals alike.
So as we head off to Carpenter Ridge near Lincoln, I'll be looking at the conditions where the forest has not been touched recently. And I'll be looking where there has been thinning and where there's been patch cuts to open up the forest to sunlight and wildlife. And with Dave Irving at the wheel, let's get started. We've just entered through the gate into what's known as Carpenter Ridge. Are we there yet?
That's right. We're not quite there yet. It's the legal access to a property referred to as Carpenter Ridge. It's a property owned by the state of Maine, managed by the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. It's 1,500 acres in size. It was purchased by the state in the late 80s, early 90s, I believe.
I put it somewhere around 1994-ish, I think.
Okay, all right. And the state purchased it with the objective of it being potential and future landfill capacity. So I became involved with the property in the fall of 2013 because the state wanted to know what was on the property from a timber standpoint, habitat standpoint as well, to provide a snapshot of what the property was like, the infrastructure, and also how to potentially manage it for habitat or timber production into the future. So I was the lucky one to write the forest management plan. I cruised it, meaning I performed the forest inventory and wrote an elaborate forest management plan for the property. So
this patch cut here is on state land now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so
yes.
This was part of your plan right here?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was definitely managed for wildlife then?
It certainly was.
Yeah.
So the history of the property was heavy cutting in the 1980s. Most of the 1,500 acres was clear cut. So now we have on most of the property 30 to 40-year-old growth dominated by shade intolerant hardwoods. With there's a mix of shade tolerance and as well as conifers as well.
Yeah. Well, let me stop you there for a second to see if I'm getting this right, because I'm once again trying to learn how to read the forest. And as we're driving in and crossing the line, I am seeing mostly thin trees that are probably no more than 6 inches in diameter, and they're all dense. This isn't old, and it's also not been pre-commercially thinned in any way, as far as this untrained eye can see. So this looks to me like action would be needed to make this more productive.
That's exactly right. It could be implemented to make it more productive. One alternative of management that I came up with as a result of my management plan was to do nothing and to just let it mature naturally. The other alternative was to actually do some light cutting, some light thinning, because again, it's thick growth. The diameter of the trees doesn't average much larger than the circumference or the diameter of a soda can.
Yeah, like all the stuff right next to us is just skinny.
Exactly. In given time, though, it's now reaching what's called the stem exclusion stage of stand development. So the trees are naturally thinning themselves out. So you can let that happen. The natural stand dynamics will occur, and trees will fall out, and albeit the trees will continue to grow slowly. Or you can institute some type of management. So that's what I came up with as an alternative to doing nothing. It was to do some crown thinnings, just really light cuts, primarily just producing biomass. But then also, because we have, primarily 1,500 acres of all of this, not much diversity on the landscape level of this property, or even surrounding properties. So I felt like, particularly giving the objective of the landowner and the name of the landowner, the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development, I felt that if we created some recreational opportunities here on the property, it would be very beneficial to citizens of Maine. My game plan came up with some light thinnings, but then also patch cuttings. So patch cuttings to create wildlife viewing opportunities. for bird watchers, Bob.
I'm on it.
For deer and moose watchers as well. But then also it's great for recreation and great for watching those animals. Of course, they're there. It's because we've created nice habitat for them too. We've created a diversity of habitats here. We're now looking at some light thinnings we've performed. We've now driven through a couple of small patch cuts, and we performed, I think, in the neighborhood of 40 acres of total patch cuts, averaging 4 acres in size each. So approximately 10 total patch cut fields, if you will. Some of these patch cuts most of them we're letting grow up naturally, and they're going to grow up just like the growth that we're looking at, the really thick hardwood growth, which is very beneficial to grouse and woodcock. And I mentioned woodcock a lot here in my talks is because it's a species of that's in decline at the national level, or actually global level, because of overall loss of habitat.
Development.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, not just development, but also farm fields reverting to other things, too.
Correct.
Yeah, because they're a forest edge habitat bird.
Right.
This does look like it'd be really friendly for grouse.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. And someday all this could be landfill.
Not this site.
Not this site. This portion of Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is taking place on Carpenter Ridge near Lincoln. The state acquired these 1,500 acres as a possible landfill site in 1995. But forestry consultant Dave Irving is turning much of this into a wildlife habitat and a recreation area. In fact, when we return in a moment, we're going to see exactly where the woodcocks will be next spring. Later in the show, we'll take a closer look at a looming crisis in the Maine woods, too. This is Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. We're on Carpenter Ridge near Lincoln. Dave Irving is a forester, and he's designed a 1,500-acre management plan for this land that the state acquired 21 years ago as a possible landfill site. But if that ever happens, it is a long time from now. So the parcel is now being managed to promote recreation and wildlife: deer, moose, bear, grouse, woodcock. To do that, we're going to have to open up part of this forest to a little sunlight, creating some open areas called patch cuts. And there will have to be some crown thinning to get a little more species and landscape diversity in here. When the state originally acquired it, it had been recently clear-cut, and now it's a young, dense, almost monocultural forest. So as I continue to learn how a forester looks at the forest, Dave is driving us around these back roads to see what's been done. We suddenly come up on a patch cut that's already got some bushes that have been clearly browsed by moose. This one looks different.
This is different. This site we did cut, like the previous site we viewed, but we came in with a stump grinder and mulcher, you might also call it, and ground up all the stumps and really leveled up the floor so then it was bush hoggable. Okay, and now a few weeks ago we had a bush hog come in. We try to wait until after August 1st to do any bush hogging on any of our habitat projects, because that's when the ground nesting songbirds are all done.
Right.
They're nesting. A lot of moose browse I can see here. So yeah, it's already working for the moose for sure.
Yeah.
So we just bush hogged, and what we've created here in the center of a bunch of other patch cuts is a roosting field. So the woodcock have three primary different components of good habitat. One is roosting field habitat, where they spend the night. So they need field-like habitat of at least a patch at least 5 acres in size, because what they do is sleep right out in the open, tucked in next to a little tuft of grass or a stump or piece of brush or something. Another component is thick, we've mentioned this before, really thick young hardwood or deciduous growth of aspen and birches, and that's where they will nest in those areas. But they'll also that's where they feed. They really like and need that really thick cover to protect themselves from avian predators as well as ground predators. Avian mean hawks and owls, and
Right.
and ground predators, fox and coyotes. And the third important component of good habitat for woodcock is our courtship fields, which are smaller fields, although this roost field that we're looking at now certainly will be utilized for their courtship dances.
You bet.
But they also would like smaller patches as well, or will utilize smaller patches from a 1/4 acre to a 1/2 acre in size.
Mm-hmm.
So we've also created some of those. So what we're looking at now is a 5-acre roost field. It's in the center of all of the other patches that we've created. And then we've also created 4 different courtship fields scattered around the area. So if that all adds up, we've approximately created 7 acres of field habitat, but then 33 acres we're just going to let regrow naturally into that thick cover for nesting and for feeding. Overall, very much a win-win scenario here.
We throw a lot of terms about early successional, late successional. I don't always know what I'm looking at. So this to me is what?
This is early successional
Yeah, okay.
habitat.
That was going to be my guess. What comes before early successional? You go from a bare field, and then slowly things grow up in it.
Actually, bare fields is early.
Really early successional.
Is pioneer
Right.
successional.
Yeah.
Okay, so we still call that early successional. Okay. So then, probably these cuts, we'll still call them early successional for at least another 15 to 20 years, and then obviously, when I say the term, it's going to be mid-successional is what we'll call it.
Okay.
And that's what we're looking at now on the uncut areas. The stuff, the pole size mixed with saplings and maybe some scattered saw log size trees. That's mid successional habitat.
Yeah.
It's pretty long until really you call something late successional. And late successional is really 60 to 70 years or older. And it's old, big trees, evidence of trees meeting their biological maturity, essentially dead or dying.
And in that, you would tend to see the largest trees. You might see a lot more maples, oaks in the right habitats, tall pines that kind of that would shade out everything beneath it.
Correct. Right. And now, like these sites in particular, we're up on top of a ridge, and naturally, if the heavy cut hadn't occurred, and if only like late successional type cutting, small entries had occurred, we probably would have much more of a forest dominated by sugar maple, yellow birch, white pine, spruce, hemlock. But because they truly liquidated the resource back in the late 80s.
Yeah, there's no fat trees in here.
Mid-late 80s, no fat trees. Lots of skinny trees.
Lots of skinny trees.
And what they've also, by that heavy cutting, they opened up all of the forest floor to tons and tons of sunlight. And that's allowed our shade-intolerant trees, right, or our sun-loving trees, the opportunity to flourish, meaning white birch, aspen, red maple. Not that those trees still won't grow with some partial shade, but
eventually they get crowded out.
Eventually they will, because they're not as well adapted to the site as the yellow birch and sugar maples and the more late successional species. Eventually, over time, you can see it here. You have aspen and birch, but then underneath you can see spruces that are just hanging out,
just waiting,
because they're shade tolerant. They can still grow with very limited sunlight, and they'll wait for that disturbance to occur, wait for those birches to die or break off in an ice storm or something, and then they'll grow. I want to get out here, Bob, and I seeded this site with some clover and other seed mixtures, and did this work a couple of weeks ago, and I'd like to see how it's coming. All right. You don't mind?
Sure. Let's help out.
So you can see some moose activity here.
Yep, a little bit.
Moose tracks, some deer tracks, and some ATV tracks.
Now, moose, we consider this good browse right there?
Yes. Yeah. We're looking at some of the patch cut that's regenerating to maple, ash, some beech, and moose will hit all of those species, probably in that order as well. Yeah, it's coming back, and that's our desired effect right there. Sapling growth is well initiated, and just after one growing season, it's 3 feet tall, 2 feet tall, more or less. Next year, it'll put on a lot of growth.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. I'm in the woods near Lincoln with professional forester Dave Irving. He's teaching me to read the forest the way a forester does. Stand by. The worst is yet to come.
This is an economic hurricane that's hit the state of Maine, and it's not anything we could have foreseen coming.
That is on the way on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. If you're just joining us, I'm outside Lincoln at a place called Carpenter Ridge. Dave Irving is a professional forester who consults through his business Shelterwood Solutions. He's been teaching me how to read the woods the way a forester does. Now, I'm okay at telling trees apart, and I'm okay at identifying forest patches that might be good for wildlife habitat, but I don't understand the science of forestry at all. For instance, there's an actual scoring system for a woodlot.
That's correct. Yeah, we have what's called site index.
Okay, so what is that? How's it work?
So, site index helps us to assess how good a site is. Okay, and
The site itself or the trees on it?
the site,
Okay.
but using the trees on it
Okay.
to help us to provide that indicator of how good the site is, because trees will only grow as tall as the site will allow them. How well the soil is drained, what type of soil it is, what type of soil horizons, whether it's sandy or sandy loam or other variables such as depth to the hard pan. Again, water drainage, so the water holding capacity. You'd think that a lot of water is beneficial, not so much. If it's poorly drained, too much water.
It's a cedar swamp.
Exactly, right. Yeah, tamarack, black spruce bog, trees grow slow. So that's the parallel that you can draw is that the poorer the site, the shorter the trees are. So that's how we we measure our sites with what's called the site index. So we apply a number to a site. Say, for example, if it's a site index of 60 for red spruce will grow to be 60 feet tall in 60 years on a site index of 60.
Okay.
Just for an example.
All right. So even if there were no red spruce on it, that would be a 60 site because that's the potential for the site.
Yes, but it would be particular to a site index of 60 for red spruce. Even though there are no red spruce there, it would still just be our way of indicating whether it's a good site or a bad site. And that would be a pretty good site.
Yeah. Well, because some sites are going to be better for softwood, some better for hardwood, and some have wet feet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, would you, as a forester, decide that this site, which has all kinds of birch and beech on it, would actually be better as a spruce forest and design a plan to do that?
I would not, but there are companies doing that.
Yeah.
They're taking good quality hardwood sites and converting them and growing spruce trees because they may have sawmills.
Yeah.
Or back in the day when we had softwood pulp mills, they wanted to grow fiber as quickly as they possibly could. So the hardwood sites are typically the better sites across Maine, better drained, deeper, more organic material. So therefore, they obliterated the hardwoods from the site and planted spruce trees, sometimes red pines.
Do you have a discussion with especially a major landowner who is trying to plan 30 to 40 years out to the next harvest and trying to guess what the market is going to be 30 to 40 years out? Because if I had just planted a whole lot of spruce 30 years ago and couldn't wait for this payday right now, I might be disappointed.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I grew up over in eastern Maine and Georgia Pacific country, and they did just that back when I was growing up in the 80s. They planted all kinds of tamarack and jack pine and even spruce and red pine and cut down their hardwood and aspen forests to do that. And if they had that nice crystal ball that we all think we have, they would have just let the hardwood and aspen grow because that's what the mill uses there in woodland. Hardwood and aspen. And the other stuff just grew up to junk.
Yeah.
A lot of those plantations, they are thinning and harvesting as saw material, but most of it is biomass. Mm-hmm. They're just cutting it off and putting it through the chipper.
And that's becoming a problem. Up until now, there's been a selection of biomass boilers around the area that use the low-value wood that can be chipped up and turned into energy. But many of the mills that have had these boilers have shut down. 2 standalone biomass boilers have shut down. There's a sudden loss of market for much of the wood that needs to be harvested. There are always up and down cycles in natural resource industries, and usually we can adjust. Landowners can simply delay harvest, mills can slow production or even shut down. But what do loggers do? As a member of the Maine legislature, worrying about the northern Maine economy is the stuff that keeps me awake at night.
What keeps me awake at night are things called spruce budworm.
Yes.
Yeah, and we mentioned earlier the beech bark disease. But really, without softwood, meaning spruce and fir pulpwood mills, I don't know what we're going to do when the spruce budworm hits here in central, northern, eastern Maine. There's substantial resource of young fir and spruce alike all across our region that it doesn't take long. You can ride out on the Stud Mill Road east of Milford and see acres upon acres of fir trees in particular that'll be so susceptible to the budworm. What are we going to do with that material, if anything?
Because the last outbreak we had the markets for it, now we don't.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe somebody will build a mill. Maybe they'll put up a new mill in Passadumkeag or
nice if we open one of the ones we already have.
That's right.
Let's not knock them all over.
So, and I'm not talking paper mills, but we need the saw. We need the sawing capability as well, because it's not all going to be pulpwood that's sold. Let's not knock them all over. Let's keep them standing for the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
I think our industry would be okay if we could salvage, and not in the way of knocking it down, but if we could keep Old Town and Madison, if we can at least keep those mills intact and start them up at some point in the relatively near future, we may be all right.
Yeah. Maybe in the long run, but the short run isn't looking too pretty. We'll say goodbye to Dave Irving of Shelterwood Solutions right here. Thanks to the day in the woods that I spent with him, I now have a much better idea how to read the woods from a forester's point of view. From the logger's point of view, things are pretty bleak. A landowner can wait out the crisis. The inventory just keeps growing. But a logger has to meet payroll and finance equipment. That's next when Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine continues on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. There's a crisis in the Maine woods. When a tree is harvested, we've still got places we can take the trunk, but the branches and crown used to be chipped for biomass. That's in a crisis right now. For that, we welcome Chuck Ames to the show. He's a logger in the Sebec-Dover-Foxcroft area. We're in Old Town at a briefing for legislators and candidates, trying to get everybody up to speed about what the current challenges are, so that maybe we can do something about it. So, Chuck, you're producing wood chips.
We have 4 machines working, and we're generating anywhere between 50 and 60 loads of biomass a week.
And currently, where's it going?
Ours right now goes all to Re-Energy and Stratton. But the problem is we're on quota, and we only sell 10 or 15 loads a week.
Yeah. So what we're really dealing with is a loss of market.
Yes.
For that. And when it's fairly low value, which is what the treetops are, it doesn't make economic sense to truck that very far. So you've got to have not only markets, but close markets.
Yes.
So have you had to readjust your whole forestry plans and your operations in order to deal with the current downswing?
Yes. In the Sebec-Dover-Foxcroft area, we used to haul biomass over to Covana and Enfield, the Lincoln Pulp and Paper Mill, and Old Town, the old mill in Old Town, which is all within a 35, 40-mile haul, and now we haul 100 miles.
So you got to haul it farther, spend the fuel to do it, and yet you're not getting any more value for it.
Actually, we get less money now than we did before.
Yep. So has that changed your operation? Have you had to downsize? Have you had to slow down, take different contracts? What do you have to do?
Certain jobs in certain locations, we end up hauling all the low grade back in the woods, which is tops and limbs.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot messier job.
Yeah, it does. Yep. So do you see a solution in the immediate future?
No. Hopefully working with the legislature and people in the business that we can come up with some solutions.
So a new legislator coming into this next session needs to know what right off the top on the biomass industry?
For one thing, it's very important because without the biomass industry, we'll lose all our sawmill capacity. Because of the sawmills, they can't sell their waste, which is sawdust, bark, and chips, and it just piles up, and pretty soon they have to, like Pleasant River Lumber in Dover, has had to go on to one shift because they can't sell their byproducts, which goes to the biomass plants.
One of the most important things about the Maine forest economy is we have to use the whole tree to make this economical.
Yes.
It's not just the best part of the tree. You really, you can truck that a long way. You can sort that and make veneer and saw logs and other uses out of it. But the tree tops, the biomass part of this, needs to have a market or it's uneconomical.
And we need to have a home for the low grade wood.
Yeah.
Or the tops and the limbs and basically if the budworm comes, we're really going to need a place for low grade wood.
That's Chuck Ames. He's a logger in Piscataquis County, and he's currently secretary of the Professional Logging Contractors of Maine. Scott Madden is president. Tony Madden is second vice president. I went out with those two guys last year to get a better understanding of what loggers do. Dana Doran is executive director of the PLC, and Dana, it really helped me see the danger to Maine's economy firsthand.
I know Scott and Tony are very appreciative of the time you spent with them last fall, just getting to know the industry and the changes. In the last 18 months, we've seen 5 major pulp and paper mills go down, and 2 biomass facilities have shut down. In all total, that represents 4 million tons of harvesting capability in the state of Maine that's not going to be utilized. And so that really has happened in a very short period of time. No one could have predicted it. We couldn't have predicted the warmest winter on record this past winter, ultra-low natural gas prices, you name it. We've seen it. So that's had the impact, and that's why I think this is impacting the whole value chain. It's loggers, obviously, truckers, landowners, foresters, equipment manufacturers, the mills themselves, the employees of those mills. So you see the major impact. As Angus King has said, this is an economic hurricane that's hit the state of Maine, and it's not anything we could have foreseen coming.
Yeah, and it all happened all at once, and it got really concentrated locally right up the Penobscot River too. If the impacts were spread out all across the state, it might be one scenario, but really there's a certain part of the state that got clobbered. Yeah, it did. I mean, that obviously the Penobscot River Valley from Millinocket all the way to Bucksport, but this does go out to as far west as Madison. And let's face it, wood in this state travels upwards of 250 miles to get to a market. So if you put that kind of radius upon where wood is traveling, it's not just the Penobscot River Valley directly, but the indirect impacts or even direct impacts are going as far and wide as Rumford and as far and wide as Calais. So it's a major economic catastrophe. Yeah. What I got to see in the woods when I went out with the Maddens was they take a tree, the bulk of that tree is going to be valuable for something, but the top of the tree is where they may have to make their margin in order to be able to afford to even do the logging.
Right.
If you don't have any market for that, then all of a sudden it's not worth taking the whole tree.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I was actually down in Florida 2 weeks ago for the American Loggers Council conference, their annual meeting. So we went to see a timber harvesting operation in Florida. And you think of Florida, you don't really think of timber harvesting, but up in the Panhandle they harvest a lot of wood. But it's traditionally one specific species, and it's pine. And they have 2 markets. They have saw logs and they have pulp, and that's it. And from one species. It's a very simplistic forestry model. In Maine, we've had the benefit of multiple species, multiple markets, and you're absolutely right. The tops and limbs do help with that margin. And if you don't have access to all those various markets for all these various species, you're not going to make up with volume for one specific species. You've got to have all these various species because that's the way the markets have been set up. So it's a very complicated situation. I wish it was as simple as Florida.
Yeah, exactly. When we talk about tsunami, there's an awful lot that was just not under our control. And I'm looking at the exchange rate between the Canadian dollar and the U.S. We have no control over that.
Correct. Yeah.
And all of a sudden it was just cheaper, and especially some of the pulp mills that might have used our wood to make pulp for another paper plant somewhere else. All of a sudden, we could not compete with the low Canadian dollar.
That's right. Yeah, and tsunami, hurricane, whatever descriptive adjective you want to put on it, go for it. It's all appropriate. The exchange rate is one thing. Low natural gas prices, obviously has impacted biomass directly. Foreign markets. All of the above. And you can grow wood in South America within 7 to 10 years. It takes 30 to 40 in Maine to grow wood. And so some of it is changes in marketplace, changes in human behavior, consumption. There are so many factors here. You could easily name 10 to 15.
Yeah.
And how do you grapple with all of them? And so that's, I think, what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to take a look at who are we competing against? Who's out there? It's not just in North America. It's globally. And what do they have for policy? What do they have for energy policy? What are they paying for labor, wages, incentives? What are the consumption patterns? What best markets do we have to move forward with in Maine based upon our tree species? We got to figure all those things out. We got to do it very fast.
Very, very fast.
Right.
Dana Doran is Executive Director of the Professional Logging Contractors of Maine. We've recently suffered a major loss of biomass demand in the Maine marketplace, and almost none of it was due to factors in the state. In fact, southern New England often influences our economy up here, often too much. What does Connecticut have to do with Maine loggers? Stand by. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This portion of today's show is coming to you from Old Town. Dana Doran is Executive Director of the Professional Logging Contractors of Maine, and he's here with me. I'm at a briefing for legislators about the forest products industry, including a near collapse of biomass energy markets. Part of that can be traced to southern New England, which has developed a system of renewable energy credits to incentivize renewable energy. Some of those states, Connecticut for example, agreed that trees grow back and therefore biomass was renewable. Then they changed their minds. Now that has hurt us, Dana.
It has, and I think the biggest or the most stark and glaring recognition is that southern New England those policymakers are generally dictating how industry operates in the state of Maine. And I think we need to turn that on its head. You may be aware there's a biomass commission that's been meeting with the legislature and industry members since August. And I think they're trying to grapple with this situation. How do we kind of take the ball in our own hands and right the ship and make policies that are going to directly benefit Mainers and our own industry rather than relying upon southern New England? Because that kind of volatility is not going to help our industry in the long run.
No. Volatility is something the logging industry has always had to deal with because the markets go up and down. We've had to deal with plants shutting down for a while or shutting down altogether. There's plenty of plants that shut down before the current wave did, Eastern Fine Paper and Brewer, all those. So we've gone through this before, but never all at once the way this is happening. When we talk about tsunami or hurricane, it was instantaneous almost, and it was massive.
It is.
And yet we're dealing with a bunch of guys who are very resilient. Almost all, in fact, all the loggers I know, especially the ones currently operating, are used to these big swings. So they can change their contract. They can bid out projects differently. They can, put a little less work in the woods and ride this thing out. Most of them can readjust their business model to take care of these swings. So they're good at it. They're used to it. But when you get something this massive, all of a sudden it really threatens the amount of employment in the state of Maine.
It does. And you're absolutely right. These are family-based businesses who are resilient. They're tough as nails. They have been able to ebb and flow with the times. But singular markets is a lot easier to deal with than multiple markets. I mean, I just named off 7 different mills that closed in the last 18 months and 4 million tons of harvesting capability. That's just not something you wake up and say, oh, do I what do I change today? They're looking at, where do I go tomorrow? Do I even stay in this? And these family-based businesses, I'm hearing from some of our members, you've got fathers who are and mothers who are trying to retire from the business, and they've got kids coming up, but those kids can't afford to take over the business because they can't afford $5 million worth of equipment. And then when they don't have markets in order to sell that wood, how do they pay that equipment back? So it's not just a change of markets and a change of direction. You're talking about major family companies that really are taking a look at, do they even sustain themselves for the long run? And that's hundreds, thousands of jobs that are on the line right now.
Yeah, that's one of the problems we're dealing with is while people ride this out, they're mostly using old equipment. They're not able to reinvest in new harvesting equipment. So they're basically living off their equity.
Correct.
That can only go on so long.
It can.
And if this trough lasts too long, you suddenly start to lose these businesses, and they're not coming back.
That's correct.
You don't have the young members of that family still involved in the industry anymore because it disappeared.
And that doesn't bode well for whatever market potential we have in the future. We want to prove that we've got a strong harvesting network for anybody who wants to invest in the state of Maine. And if that harvesting network goes away, it's less likely that a company is going to invest significant, hundreds of millions of dollars in either a new facility or reinvesting in an older facility.
Yep. So if this part of the economy drops out, it doesn't get reinstituted very quickly.
Correct.
Or at all.
Yeah.
And so this commission came along. Basically, there was a bill in the legislature this last year to at least try to subsidize a little bit some of the biomass facilities so they would remain viable and we could take the low-grade wood there.
Yep.
So that commission is doing its work. Do you know when a report is due?
We're hearing that a draft report should be due to be looked at by the Commission by the end of October, and then with a final report due to the legislature by December 1st. It has to go back to two committees of jurisdiction, Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, and to the Energy Utilities Committee. So it's coming soon, and we're hopeful that it's going to have a couple of really decent recommendations that the legislature can consider not only next year but years after.
And what we're really trying to do is bridge a gap. We are, because of this current crisis. The reality is the forest products industry is not doing that badly in the state of Maine. Often it's reported that it's a dying industry, and in fact it's not. Yes, we lost some old-style paper making, but that demand for that was down, and these markets will always change. But some of the other markets are doing very well. I think saw logs seem to be doing well. Tissue mills seem to be doing well. Specialty paper. So the industry is still there. We just have to make sure we don't lose some of the capacity to serve that industry during this trough.
Yeah. The legislature provided a Band-Aid in terms this past session with respect to a 2-year contracting bill, which in many respects is not any different than many New England states have done. New Hampshire has 20-year contracts for their biomass facilities. Vermont has 10 and 20-year contracts for their biomass facilities. And Maine has never had any long-term contracts for their biomass facilities. So in many respects, we're doing a little bit of what the other states have already done. But I think what the commission is trying to do is not only bridge a gap, but create markets. Inevitably, we're only going to get what we put into it. And really, it's our job to create those markets, create opportunities for markets, and I think that's what the Biomass Commission is doing is, all right, we've got a Band-Aid, we've got a bridge, now we've got to close that gap, and we've got to find a long-term road, a straight road, in which to build on for the future.
And I would say the state has to recognize that it's in a competitive situation. Our state has to compete with other states. Other states do provide assistance, subsidies if necessary, to their industries, more so than Maine does. So if you look at Wisconsin or Minnesota or something like that, you are in competition with them.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and the sooner Maine realizes that, the better off we're going to be. We've got a federal group that's come in to help the state of Maine really analyze what our issues are, what our deficiencies are, where our opportunities are. We see some major opportunities for analysis and data collection over the next 6 months, and that's information that really is going to help us plan. We're going to know who we're competing against. We're going to know what changes systemically we need to make, and this is all going to be third-party certified, and that's going to provide that roadmap for the future. But we really need to get our act in order first and determine how we compete, who we compete with, and what we need to do to change.
And there's another additional urgency to solving this problem or addressing it as quickly as possible, and that's spruce budworm. The last outbreak we had, which was massive, there was a place to take the salvaged wood. If we don't have those low-grade wood product markets, this time around, a lot of that value just dies, falls over in the forest, and is never used, and we don't recapture that value, which sustains a lot of the investment in our forest.
Right.
So if we don't fix that before the trees start dying, we have an even bigger problem than we do now.
Yeah, I mean, we had, with the last spruce budworm epidemic between the late 1960s to the mid-1980s, in Maine, we were essentially able to consume all of the low-value spruce fir pulp that came out of those forests was harvested as a result of the budworm. Today, we have about 20% of that capacity left, if that. And if we look at budworm, we really need to look at a different harvesting technique. We need to go to a cut-to-length system rather than a fellow-buncher whole tree system. Let's face it, conventional logging is 5% of our total industry, whereas back in the last budworm, it was 100% of the industry. Right. And so now with 5% of that conventional left, we have mechanized equipment. Well, our mechanized equipment really is not prepared to go in and harvest that wood. So now we take that a step further. Our loggers, without markets, going to invest in that kind of equipment to go ahead and harvest that wood. That's a big unknown at this point. So without a market, we may not have harvesting capability to go ahead and harvest that wood.
Yep. So to some extent, we've got to make sure we don't have our heads in the sand here. We've had a big economic crisis. Now we're going to have a natural crisis right behind it.
Yep.
If we don't have our act together, we're in trouble.
Yep. Great point. And I think it takes all of us at this point to move this thing forward.
All hands on deck.
It is.
Dana Dorn, Executive Director of the Professional Logging Contractors of Maine. We opened today's show in the woods outside Lincoln with Dave Irving. And thanks to all these guys for teaching me how to read the woods and better understand Maine's forest economy. Next week, we're off to Bar Harbor. I'll be walking the streets downtown in search of ghosts for Halloween. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. Join me next Saturday morning at 9 and Sunday morning at 8. And remember, all shows are archived at 929theticket.com, so you can re-listen or share the show with anyone. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.